We want to thank God for Reverend Errol Carrim. He is a part of this ministry team, and I bless God for him and for his availability and always willingness to be a part of what we're doing here. And I thank the Lord for him. And he's in South Africa at the time, you heard yesterday. And so he's 5, 6 hours ahead of us. And so we thank God for him. We thank God for the grace that He has given to him to be up and alert at this time of the morning. And
Yes,
so,
yes.
Reverend Carey, welcome to
Thank
you,
you.
sir. It is good to
Thank
have
you,
you.
Rev.
Yeah, it's good to
Yes.
have you. Welcome, welcome.
Okay, good morning to all of you, and thank you, Reverend Ruth. And, from Sister Pearl's presentation on Monday that showed us that marriage is like in the storm. We have a lot of things, and she shared from her years of experience and just reminded us, her famous line, marriage is not for children. And just reminding us that in the midst of it, God is there to help us through all of what comes our way. And then I last night I focused you on putting God at the center because He's the one that created the institution. It is for Him that we are in this relationship. It was created before the fall, so now we are being asked to live out something that was created before the fall, after the fall. And that's where the challenge comes because we're all affected by the fall. And so if we were in marriage in the garden before the fall, we wouldn't be having these sessions. We'd be having a great time. But because of the fall, we are trying to live this out, and we cannot do that unless God is at the center, unless we are focused on Him, because it's His institution, and He's the one going to give us all that we need to live this out in the right way. No matter, regardless of what the world says to you, it is only by the power and the presence of God in our lives, in our hearts, that we can fulfill the covenant of marriage as God designed it to be. So now, what I want to take you on tonight is we established that we need God. How do we set boundaries that make sure that this marriage is as God designed it to be? So I want to share with you on restoring the boundaries in your marriage. Most of my content for this is coming out of a book written by Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend, entitled Boundaries. Excellent book. If you haven't read it, please pick it up. It is a very, very good book that helps you to understand the importance of boundaries. We're talking about it in marriage, but boundaries extend in every other relationship, whether it's work, with family, wherever, and you will see that as we go through tonight. Boundaries in marriage. Boundaries are essential to have a healthy relationship, and we'll explain that some more as we go. But what are boundaries in marriage? Boundaries are like property line. We all have fences. Well, why do you put up a fence, right? You put up a fence, you put up a wall, whatever. A boundary is to decide who comes in and also who goes out, right? That's what the boundary does. It separates your property, and so your neighbor just can't come into your property because there's a fence. Okay. But neither can your dog just leave the yard because there's a fence. So the boundaries, the property lines, and they define where one person ends and another person begins. Like, so think of it now. So we're shifting the boundaries to say there's a boundary between you and your spouse in terms of who you are as individuals. And we'll unpack that some more. So the boundaries defined us, they define who I am and who I am not. Okay. So boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins. This is one of my favorite lines I say to people all the time. You got to know where you end and the other person begins. And I said to you last night that you can't change your spouse. It's not your responsibility to change your spouse. Okay? It is your responsibility. I didn't say this part of it, but it's your responsibility to live in such a way when it comes to your relationship with God that your spouse will want what you have. And you have to recognize that you are responsible for you. You need to know where your spouse end, where you begin, and where you end and your spouse begins. And don't confuse the two. And we'll unpack that some more. And what I'm saying to you is Don't take responsibility to think, I have to fix my spouse. I have to make my spouse do this. I have to make them do that. What you need to be focusing on is, who am I? What am I becoming? What, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, a leadership podcast, and they were talking about doing a 360 and interviewing people for around you when you, as a leader, 360 is having the people all around you give a feedback. People above you give a feedback. And the people that you are leading, so your peers, those you are leading, and those that lead you, they all give feedback on who you are. But one of the question is, what is it like to be on the other end of me? You know, um, just think of that. What does it mean? What does it feel like to be on the other end of me? So asking your spouse, what does it feel like? You know, to experience me as your spouse? Well, just be honest. Now, that's a tough question because you might hear some things that's going to be painful. What does it feel like to be on the other end of me? What does it feel like to receive from me? Is it kind? Is it loving? Or is it jarring? Is it defensive? Is it hurtful? Uh, but that's that boundary line thing, knowing that people experience me, and that's one of the things I say to people at my age. I say now, things about life, the material thing doesn't bother me anymore. Even what people think of me doesn't bother me anymore. What really bothers me and what I really want to make sure is, how do people experience me when I relate to them, and do I leave them feeling safe and wanting to know more about Christ because of the conversation? Do people feel the experience of me on their life? Is it something that leave them with a positive experience? Because at the end of the day, that's all people remember of us. They don't remember the car we drove, the house we lived in, the kind of clothes we wore, all of these things. What they remember is how they experience us. That's true for your spouse. Your spouse is right now is love being around you. They love coming home to you. They love being in your presence because they're experiencing you in a very loving, kind, desiring way. Or they don't want to come home. They're staying away. They stay not longer than they need to because they don't like being in your presence of how they're experiencing you. So boundaries then says, I am responsible for me, and my spouse is responsible for who they are. They help us to clarify ownership of our feelings, our attitudes, our thoughts, and our behaviors. And you own every positive, uplifting, encouraging word you say to your spouse. At the same time, you own every painful, sarcastic, demeaning, derogatory word you say to your spouse. That's on you. That's not on your spouse. Your spouse's behavior is not the reason for the response. It's only the trigger. The response is coming from what's inside of you already. So boundaries say, I own my feelings, I own my attitudes, I own my thoughts, I own my behaviors, I own my words. If you're hearing me say anything tonight, I'm saying what I was saying last night. This is on you to be responsible for you. And all of those there, feelings, thoughts, attitudes, behaviors, and I should have had words in there. Owning all of those, you want to express all of those in a way that honors God. That is your objective. Okay? That is the struggle we're up against from this journey here till we get to the other side to be with Jesus. Is bringing all of these under the lordship and the control of Jesus Christ. That is, once you make that your objective, you own that and say, that is for me to work on, you will be able to have a transformational effect on the people around you because they'll experience you in a way that is loving, compassionate, kind, forgiving, being able to say yes, let your yes be yes and your no be no, be able to love your enemies, be able to forgive, the whole Sermon on the Mount conversation that God gives us. Um, we could live that way when we bring all these things under the lordship of Jesus Christ. So the marriage, the boundaries say, I own who I am, and I am totally responsible for everything I do because that's my boundaries. I am responsible for me. Okay. So having clear boundaries then is essential for a healthy, balanced lifestyle, spiritual growth, and our ability to give and receive love. So having clear boundaries, and we're going to talk about what different areas of those boundaries. So you need to be clear on your boundaries. And I'm going to say to you, a boundary is when you take responsibility for what you're going to do. A suggestion is when you ask your spouse to not do something. So one will clarify that. But when you have clear boundaries, when your yes is yes, your no is no, you know what you want, you know what you don't want, and you have to sit down and spend time with yourself. Things irritate you. Well, why does it irritate you? Is there something that your spouse is doing that you don't like? Or is it just you, carrying some baggage of something that if you really look at it, you're thinking, what's the big deal? Okay, what's the big deal? So one of the things around my house is my wife and I in the early stages of our marriage never wanted to leave dirty dishes in the sink at night before you go to bed. Always want to make sure the sink is clean. And that was the thing, and it was more me than her. I always want to make sure. And then, so I'll be a little, you know, um, testy because, she put something in the sink there and I already do the dishes. I'm ready to go to bed now. And then I realized, wait a minute, what's the big deal? So what if there are dirty dishes in the sink in the morning? Okay. So it was an irritation to me. But then I started and I thought about it. It was, this is not, this is nothing to make a big deal about. So think about it. Okay. Clear on your boundaries, but something that you're making a fuss about is not a boundary issue. Okay. When I grew up, this is how it worked, and I don't know for a lot of you on the platform, but when I grew up, you walk in the front door, and as you walk in the front door, it was the living room area. Okay, and you went to the living room, and then you went to the kitchen. The bedrooms were off on the right, doors to go, and then through the dining room, you went straight into the kitchen. But on the days when they polished that living room, you didn't walk through that living room. You went around the house and you came in from the back into the kitchen. And we were saving that polished floor for when friends came to visit, you know. Now, I could develop issues about walking in spaces I clean and be really upset about things when my spouse do certain things. But the point is that really a boundary issue? Or that is something you need to get over? That if someone walks in a space you clean, that's okay. Okay. We don't lose it and get upset and say, you don't sit on this chair, you don't do this, you don't do that. Those are not boundary issues. Those are things you need to get over with that you're carrying from your past, that you're still hanging up with, you know, and you create stress in the marriage. It's not a boundary issue. And you will see very clearly where we need to have clear boundaries. But those are things I'm just bringing up because I'm sure we all have them, little things that we do have. Okay. I love the kitchen. I cook a lot and I have certain ways of preparing my food. And my wife comes to help me. It's like, so I have to learn. My daughter came to help me. I had to learn. That's okay. We're doing the same thing. They do it their way and let them be, you know, as they want to be, because that's not a boundary issue. That's just little things I carry that I need to just get over. So there's some things in your life, in your space, that they're not boundary issues. They're things you need to just let go of. Okay. And think it's okay. It's going to be fine. And then there's some things where you have to be very clear on the boundaries. And so we want to clarify that. Just stop being so uptight about these things, because they're not that significant. And it does more harm to the relationship than it helps the relationship. And once it happened once or twice, you get over it. Trust me, it'd be okay. All right. Okay. So moving on. So now we're going to get into what's acceptable within the relationship. Resolve conflicts and allow both of us to grow together while retaining our individual identity. Now I need to have some clarity here. These boundaries, remember we're talking about the two shall become one, and we talked about that last night about that leaving and cleaving and becoming one. And that two shall become one. In many ways, it reflects the sexual union, and it also reflects how we begin to operate as a couple, and how my what I do and where I go and how I do things is now done with you in mind, because you are now part of who I am. Okay, but at the same time, you as a person don't lose yourself. And this is what happens a lot of times in relationship. When we were talking last night, when you build a relationship with your spouse and everything is what they they're about in your life, then when they leave or they do something, your life is over, because your identity was in your spouse. So you're not eating anymore. You're not sleeping. You're sick. People commit suicide. People are shut down for the rest of their life. They break down mentally, or they become withdrawn from people. And all of this is because your identity was in your spouse. And when your spouse did something that was devastating to you, whether they went out and they committed adultery, or they left, or whatever the thing, you are so devastated that your life is over. That meant you had no identity. You had no individual identity. Your life was built in your spouse. And we have seen it, you know, in the people around us. We've seen it. And some of us would have lived through it. And some of us probably experiencing it even now. Okay. Your identity cannot be, I want to say this as clearly as I can. Your identity cannot and must not be in your spouse. Your identity is who you are in Christ. And as Sister Paul reminded us, if your identity is in Christ, then when you're going through the storm of the worst experience possible, the ship being destroyed, and you think your life is over, like Paul, you could say, the God whom I serve and the God who protects me has said to me, it'll be okay. But when your identity is in your spouse, you can't hear God, you can't see God, you can't believe God will resolve this, you can't believe it will ever get fixed. Your life comes to a standstill, and you have no hope left. Friends, if I leave anything with you tonight, I'm saying your identity, your identity must remain in Christ. We maintain our individual identity. We are responsible for our spiritual, mentally, emotional, physical um, growth and development. That's not on your spouse. And I said last night, when we have these wives that are saying, I want my husband to be the spiritual head, and your husband is not doing it because he's not in that place. He doesn't have the capacity. He hasn't surrendered to Christ yet. You don't let your house come to a standstill. You need to step to the plate and lead your house, because you want God to still be present in your family, leading your house. Okay. So individual identity, I am stressing that because I think in marriage, there is that mistake we make to find our purpose and our meaning in our spouses. And when things break up, we can't deal with it. Okay?
There's
All
a
right.
comment. There's a comment.
Okay, go ahead. Yes, go ahead,
I,
please.
I think that's one of the reasons that we see persons backslide after their marriage breaks up.
Yes, yes. Perfect. That's a good comment. One of the reasons people backslide, yes, is because they lost their individual identity, taking no responsibility for them, for their own well-being, placed everything in their spouse. And when the spouse leaves, they turn their back on God, when God all along wanted to help you, but he was never the reason for who you were. It now became your spouse. Good comment. That is true. Yes. Okay. So healthy boundaries are achieved by balancing. Keep these four words in mind: love, respect, freedom, and accountability. So we have to balance love, loving God, loving yourself, loving your spouse. Respect, respecting yourself, respecting your spouse. Uh, you know, um, you don't respect is not something you demand, it's something you earn by how, people will treat you the way they see you treat yourself. Okay? So you need to show respect for yourself, the words you speak, how you behave, how you show up. If you behave in a disrespectful way, then people are going to s- receive from you the signal of it's okay to disrespect me and treat me, you know, um, in an unhealthy way. So you have to have respect and freedom. The freedom to recognize that, as I just emphasized, you are free. You should always remain free to choose as you see best for your life to reflect God in you. Sometimes spouses try to control that freedom. You can't go here, you can't go there, you can't do this, you can't do that. And once a spouse is doing that, really it's their problem. You could say how much trouble you've had or what your senior spouse did or whatever, but your fear of what your spouse does, where your spouse goes, what your spouse is doing, that's insecurity. That's on you because your insecurity doesn't change your spouse's behavior. All it does is make you more miserable. Okay? So just remember, you are free to offer the grace and the freedom to your spouse for your spouse to be themselves. Does that mean you're not going to get hurt or they're not going to make their wrong choice? No, because you love, you already put yourself at the place of being hurt. So expect, not because I am trusting and I am loving and I'm compassionate and caring, nothing will go wrong. In the midst of all of this, we are still broken and things will happen. Okay? God sent his son to die on the cross because he loves us. And it still pains him to see how we refuse to accept the grace he offers us to live a meaningful life. And we chase after the things that we want and bring all this destruction to our lives. And even when we're doing that, he hasn't abandoned us. He's just waiting, like the father for the prodigal son, for when we are ready to return. But that waiting, he's watching us do this to ourselves. You know, it's very, very um, painful to God to see his children being offered all this grace and refusing it. So the freedom is yours. And accountability is huge. You are responsible to yourself, you're responsible to your spouse. You need to be accountable. Okay. So these are the four things that we could spend more time with, but that are foundational to healthy boundaries. So let's kind of explore then the different type of boundaries. Okay. Setting boundaries on time. This is huge. Having clear clear expectation and time. And what I mean by this is, uh, do you have boundaries and time where you take time to take care of you? And those of you who heard me before, I've always said to you, God is the center of your life, but the next person that you need to be responsible for is yourself. Making time to take care of you, okay, before you focus on your spouse, because when you're at your best, then you could take care of your spouse at your best and your family at your best. So the boundaries of time, you being able to um to set time, time for rest, time for my time with God. When I have to do things, this happens all the time. One spouse is very time conscious, the other one isn't. Okay, so the other one wants to be on time, the other one, if they're late, then it doesn't matter. All right. So here's the thing about a boundary. When you set in a boundary of time, you have to be able to say, and this is gonna, a little extreme, but bear with me. A time boundary says, you know, so you like to show up on time on church on Sunday, and your spouse just get up and take the time, and but so by the time you're walking, the service already started, the singing, and you just kind of like, you know, it already affecting you because you don't want to be late. So now you show up in church, you don't, your spirit of worship and all of that is not even there because you're so mad. I know you guys know what I'm talking about, but I'm just gonna say it, right? So I know it doesn't relate to you. But now you're in church and you're not happy because you were late. And you look over there and your spouse is clapping and singing and they're happy and you're like, okay? But let's set a boundary here. So you need to be able to say to your spouse, you know, I do not like showing up late for church. Okay? So we need to work something out here. I do not like showing up. So you owning that I don't like showing up late for church. So now we have to decide how we're going to fix this. Well, two ways. If we have two vehicles, then I will leave and you come on your own. Um, that's one way. The other way is, or whether we walk, I will leave. But what I'm getting at here, you're taking ownership for you and what you want. You can't make your spouse be on time. That's not the focus of the time boundary. You're taking ownership for what you want, for what the time should be. And you're going to act on that in a way that's going to help you to not show up in church angry because you and your wife, or you and your husband strolling in late, and your spouse is happy and they're clapping and singing, and you're still mad because you're late. Okay. Now that's one. The other thing is maybe showing up a little late is not a big deal. So maybe I shouldn't make a fuss. Okay. I don't know. I'm just saying. But what I'm saying is time is important, to be clear about what are the boundaries you want for time. And be able to express that to each other and say, this time, okay, so time, when do we, um, when do we go to bed, in terms of um, work or kids or whatever? What are the boundaries around these things? Okay, how much time do we spend um, doing certain things? Give time for people to be able to know very clearly, this is what I need time for. This is what we need time for. But have these boundaries and take responsibility for what you want to do. Don't make it. So if your spouse is normally late, you can't make your spouse be on time. You need to take action to make sure that you are able to very clearly state what the boundaries of time are for you and what you need to do and how you need to do it. Help each other out. If you see there's something that'll keep your spouse back on a Sunday morning, well, you can do it. You can help. To make sure that we are able to keep the time. Okay. All right. Next one is emotional boundaries. We need to be able to be clear on how things impact it emotionally, and be able to say very clearly to your spouse, what are my emotional needs? When do I need that? How do I need that? Okay. So being able to say, to your spouse, when I am upset, you know, um, I am unable to engage in the conversation in a healthy way. Okay. So I need some time to cool down. All right. So when I'm upset, I do not want to have the conversation. I will not have the conversation, because when your emotions are in full gear, you behave in ways and you say things that you know that's going to be painful and hurtful. So you need time to cool down. So that's a clear boundary. So your spouse need to know, when we have a disagreement or something happened, especially when I feel embarrassed or whatever, I do not want to talk about it. I will not talk about it. So you say that to your spouse. So then, your spouse, on the other hand, is one who just like to go at it right away. Let's just get it over with. Let's talk it through, and all of that. So now we have to figure out, what are the boundaries here? Because if your spouse comes at you, you get more upset. If you don't speak to your spouse gets upset. Then we have to sit down and say, okay, so how can we work a compromise here? What's the best way to go forward? And then that's when you have to be willing to say, okay, I would try, to have this conversation for your sake. And you need to say, okay, I would try to wait for your sake. All right. But here's the thing. We always come back to it. We don't just use it as an excuse to never talk about it. Okay. But you need to know what your emotional needs are. What do you need? I need you to, when I come home in the evening, I just really need you to sit with me and just hold my hand, put your hands around me. I just need to feel you close. That's what I need. Okay. Well, rather than hearing, and I hear it so often when I'm talking to a couple, he doesn't want to be close to me. He doesn't want to hold my hand. He doesn't want, she doesn't want to do this for me. I like her to be, but you never explain that clearly. What do I want? Oh, when I'm in public, I don't want you holding my hand, you know, or when I'm in public, I want you to hold my hand. What are the boundaries here? You know, so some people are very uncomfortable with physical closeness in public and all of that, for a number of different reasons. If that makes you unhappy and uncomfortable, then be able to say it and say it clearly, so it doesn't create this unhappy scene in public where people, seeing the both of you and seeing you twitching and don't like him to be touched or whatever. Um, be clear on what are the boundaries. What are the emotional things? What are the things that I know I want? And what are the things I know that I will not? Remember the boundary, right? What you keep out, what you keep from coming in, and what you're able to let out. Okay, so be able to be clear on what are your emotional needs, what you need from your spouse, when you need it. Okay, um, when I'm sharing something because I'm upset, I don't really want you to answer me. I just want you to hear me and hold me and let me cry. That's all I want. So once, if you start answering me, then I don't want to continue this conversation. Your spouse knows exactly what you're asking for. This is one of the places we struggle so much because people have emotional needs, but they don't know how to express what they need. And then they get mad at the spouse for not giving them what they need, but the spouse is unable to because they don't know what they need. What are your emotional boundaries? What are the things you are wanting to allow in? What are the things you want to let out? You need to know what you feel, how you want to respond to it, how you want your spouse to participate in that emotional space in your life. You set the boundaries for that. Because if you don't, your spouse is going to come at you the only way they know how. That's how they experience emotions. That's how they deal with emotions. And they're going to deal with you in the exact same way. Okay, they have no other way of doing it. The reason why you need to be clear on what your needs are, when you need it, and how you need it. Okay? So this is a big one, your emotional needs.
Yeah, there's a comment related to emotional boundaries. This
Yes.
requires great self-awareness.
Hi, yes. Perfectly. Thank you, whoever made that comment. Um, this is big. This is self-awareness covers the whole boundary issue. You have to know who you are and what you want, how you want it, when you want it, what's enough, what's too much. You have to be so self-aware that you are able to invite in to your space, or give out from your space in a healthy way. So self-awareness underlies the whole conversation. Thank you for that comment of setting boundaries, because you need to be very self-aware of what you're asking for, what your needs are. So thank you for that comment. Yeah, that's huge.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's another emotional comment on emotional boundaries. Actually, there are two. And
Yeah.
then I go to a time boundary question.
Okay. Yeah.
So
Okay.
comment, I must admit that there are times my spouse stated that he did not want to continue a conversation, and I lacked the awareness to understand that he was setting a boundary
Yeah.
and unwittingly prolonged the conversation, making things worse.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's a good comment. And I just let me just say this quickly. This person got it right when he said when you prolong the conversation, I mean you have crossed the boundary, you have ignored the boundary. And when
Mm,
somebody crosses over into your property, ignoring your boundary, it just create more frustration for you. And so that's right. We want to stop so we can get the better of our spouse when things calm down.
good.
Yeah.
Question, still on emotional
Yeah.
boundaries. What
Okay.
about if your spouse is not emotionally intelligent and does not like
Okay.
to speak about emotions?
Right. Okay. So remember, this is your boundaries, right? You have to set your boundaries. If your spouse is not emotionally intelligent, they don't want to speak about the boundaries, your spouse needs to know very clearly what are your boundaries. Okay. So let's say, for example, your spouse, don't I speak about emotion, but you tell your spouse, um, I don't like it when you want to hug me, when I'm in the supermarket, or in the church, and your spouse just want to show off, or want to say how much I love you, but it's just a public thing. You feel very uncomfortable. You're saying to your spouse, I do not like it. It doesn't feel good for me when you do that to me. So please, um, If you do that to me, I will pull myself away because I do not want you to do that. Okay. Because for you, for whatever reason, that's a struggle you have, that's another issue. But my point is, I'm making an example. You need to tell your spouse what are your boundaries. You can't make them tell you what's theirs again, but they have to want what you have. If they can see how you operate with your boundaries, maybe they will learn from you how to talk about these things. But don't pressure them, don't get mad at them. You just model to them how to talk about your emotions, how to express these things. And when you hear them trying to, then you want to be supportive and encouraging and be able to say, I really appreciate you telling me how angry you was because when your brother called. Just noticing that and saying that to your spouse is going to help them to recognize that you're okay with seeing their emotions and you acknowledge it. So don't get stuck on the fact that they are not emotionally intelligent. What you want to be focused on is how can I model it in such a way and comment and encourage them in such a way that eventually they would begin to start doing it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Question on the time boundary.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
question is, how can we navigate time when one spouse is a night owl and the other is an early bird?
Right. Yeah. So we have to make compromise. Remember, the two shall become one. You're no longer single now. You're a couple. You're two, and that means you have to figure out how do we make the adjustment. How do I make room in my life as a night owl for my spouse who's an early bird, and how do I make space for my spouse who's a night owl and I am an early bird. How do we do that? Okay, so that's what we have to agree on that. That okay, I know that sometimes I have to wake up early because this is what has to happen, and I will. And sometimes I will let you know the other person stay up late. That's fine, because that's what we need to do. But when we have to do things that has implication for the both of us, then we have to make the compromise. We have to make the compromise for each other. And then we do it and we do it willingly and we do it. My favorite illustration of this is I hate opera music. I think the person who came up with opera music, who came up with musicals more than, yeah, both of them, musicals are people. If I'm going to see a play, speak the words. You don't just sing the words to me. What do I want? I listen to music and I don't like opera. I don't like musicals. My wife loves musicals. And so I will go to a musical and they're expensive. I will spend this money and go to this musical with my wife. And I will have a good time for my wife's sake. And she knows she's not going to go to, expect me to go to an opera. But when I go, she knows I'm going for her because that's the only reason. Because I love my wife and it's something she enjoys. I'm making an adjustment. Okay, I'm making an adjustment. My wife don't like crowds. She don't. I love to be around people and stuff. So when I'm in among people who I do a presentation, I'm there talking, and I know she's there, and she's there with me because this is my thing. I love it. Okay, so we make these compromises, but you can't say you like to talk if you be around people, and then your spouse says she don't like it. So when you start talking, she goes off to a corner, she goes in the car and wait for you. She's not working to try to make space for you. Okay, so all I'm saying is, night owl, early morning person, we need to figure out how can we work together for the interests of both. I wouldn't expect a night owl to always be an early morning person, vice versa, but I'll expect at times the night owl will be an early morning person for the spouse sake and vice versa. So that's how we work that out. We're no longer single. So we take into consideration how we show up for each other. Next one, physical space. We all need that. And we all need to know when we need that. Okay. We need to make room. Give people space to be themselves, right? So some people who are their own insecurity, they can't give their spouse physical space, right? They're all over them all the time. You need to be intentional about creating space, allowing your spouse to have, and you be able to set the boundaries here and say, um, I will be, you know, what I want to say, I want to go for myself. I just need to be alone. I need my alone time. And so if you see me sitting quietly or having my alone time, interrupt me, I would not engage in a conversation. Okay? And just know that. So if they come and interrupt you, you don't engage. Now, here's the thing about a boundary. You don't tell people what a boundary is. And then when they come, you go like, I told you not to do this. You're doing it again. Then the boundary, it has consequences, and the consequences need to be applied for people to know. So around South Africa here, we have a lot of electric fences for boundaries, right? So if someone step up to our place and attempt to cross the boundary, because the electricity in the fence, they're going to get shocked. That's a consequence. Okay, it's just a consequence. So we need to be able to act on the consequence of the boundary. You need physical space. We all need it. Some people, the reason they avoid it is because they can't be alone with themselves. Okay, for whatever reason, and there are a whole lot of different reasons for those things. But create allow people to have their physical space. Don't have to be on them all the time. And you need to express what kind of physical space you need, and your spouse need to respect that for you in order to create the space that you feel safe, you feel okay, because you have the physical space you need. And sometimes we have couples where one spouse wants to be all over the other one all the time, and the other one just wants room to breathe. And it says, "Oh man, I can't get room to breathe." You wherever they are, you're there all the time. You don't let them go anywhere by themselves. You don't let them do anything by themselves. You just have to be all over them. That insecurity does not make a marriage healthy. You need to be able to let your spouse have physical space. Trust them. Let them be, because when they have this space, they could be in a better space to respond to you when you let them take care of themselves in that way. Okay? So being on people all the time is not a sign that you really love them. It's a sign that you're very insecure. Give them space to be themselves. That shows that you love enough to say, I want you to be the best of you. So here is have your space. Whatever the boundaries you ask for, I will allow you to have that. Okay? All right. So we all need that. And then the next one is sexual boundaries. This is a huge one because we don't talk much about this one. The thing is, the God's ideal plan was for two people who come together and they're both um virgin. They're not, remember, the marriage was created before the fall. They're not influenced by anything else. So what they create sexually will be their own experience, own unique experience. Now on this side of the fall, we know that's not true. People experience sexual abuse. They get involved in pornography, and they're told certain things. So now you come together as a couple, and there are all kind of challenges here. Okay, so what are the boundaries? What are the things that you struggle with sexually that you need to say to your spouse? Okay, your spouse may want to do a particular thing sexually, and for you, it doesn't feel good. You despise it, but you're doing it because your spouse wanted it. But I was um, speaking to a client some time back, and we're talking about where they found themselves in a relationship sexually with the spouse, and I made a comment to the client. I said, so the challenge is you're giving sex to your spouse, you're not having sex with your spouse, and because the boundaries are not clear, because having sex um, is different from giving sex. And a lot of times, it goes both sides. I know it's mainly women do it, but I know a lot of guys who do it as well. Give sex to the spouse rather than have sex with the spouse, because clear, we haven't talked about what are the boundaries. You know, what are the things? Because you're bringing baggage. Especially if you abuse sexually and all of that, or you're exposed to unhealthy sexual things at a young age, it has created in your mind what this is supposed to be. And then you come to your spouse, and all of a sudden your spouse is supposed to be all of this thing, or you have all this fear, you can't be touched because you're carrying all this trauma from being sexually abused. And if you're touched in a certain way, you have to be able to have these very clear conversations about the boundaries as to, and then there might be a boundary you have to start with early in the marriage that will eventually be moved because you did some work, you did some counseling, you worked through some processes that now you could take that fence down. There is not that fear anymore because you've done the work, the self-awareness to realize where this is coming from. You got healing there and you're better at it. But this is one of the biggest um, one of the most difficult places in marriages when it comes to boundaries and it comes to being sexual and how we have sex, when we have sex, where we have sex, why we have sex. You know, um, the only question we don't answer is who we have sex with because we know that. But all the other questions we need to be able to process and have the boundaries that makes it good so that we have sex, we don't give sex. Okay. But this is one of the most troubled areas, and I talk to a lot of people. um, this is where it is because a lot of people can't say really to their spouse, what are my boundaries? And remember, I said, you know, why you want this boundary? Why is it important to you? I know that this is a huge area where couples struggle with boundaries to make this a pleasant, meaningful, fulfilling experience as God ordained it to be. If a spouse is only focused on the sexual act and not concerned about the person involved in the sex, we have a whole other problem here. Okay, it means that they want the sex more than they care about the well-being of the person they're having the sex with. So that underlies a whole other issues in the marriage already. But if there's a disrespect and there was whatever happened, we have to have this conversation, you know, or else what's going to result in, yeah, the Bible did talk to us that we don't withhold, but yet Paul is saying this in a context of we are able to we are loving each other, we are respecting each other, we are caring for each other, and part of that is we give ourselves sexually so that we keep each other from being tempted and getting distracted by our sexual needs and desires. But if a person is disrespected, then the desire for sex is not there because the pain of the disrespect is overriding the desire. So we need to work with that. We need to talk that through. And so the person who's been disrespected needs to be able to say to the other person, you know, we need to talk about this because right now, sex is not the thing that I want to have. I want us to deal with this because I love you and I want us to work this out. But I just know that this has hurt me deeply and this is what I feel, and we need to talk, and maybe need to get help from someone else. But you don't just shut down and give your body sexually and never deal with it because all it does, like I said last night, is just build the emotional walls higher and higher and higher, till the point where you get to you lay there sexually, but emotionally and mentally you're someplace else. And that is a very unhealthy place to get to. But you don't get there overnight. That builds. So the disrespect, we need to deal with this now. We need to talk about this. We need to talk about the emotional pain that it caused me. We need to work this out so those walls don't go up, that your sexual experience become a giving with no participation. Eventually it's going to shut down. I know this is the big area, and I do other presentations around this and talking about the different things, but I did so many people that the sex in the marriage is not as fulfilling and rewarding and meaningful because the boundaries have not been set. Digital boundaries, again, back to the insecurity thing. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to see every message and, you know, yes, my wife have password for my phone. She can get into my phone, she can get into my email, she can get into, there's nothing that she doesn't have access to, but that's not because she asked me for them. That's not because or when I turn my back, she's looking at my phone, you know. You have to trust your spouse. And if you having to look at their phone or look at their message or look at, if your spouse is doing something that is compromising the marriage, again, you're not going to fix that by being crossing all of the boundaries. Okay, so digital boundaries says I respect my phone, my spouse's space, the computer, the iPad, the phone, whatever they're doing. I don't have to um, be this police, and when they sleep in, I want to open the phone, or they're not, they're asking them to share their password, but they wouldn't, but I shared mine. Why, why would, so you shared yours, you shared it because you want them to share theirs, or you shared it because you just want them to have it. Okay. If you're sharing it for them to share for theirs, then is that your motive? You know. So what I'm saying is we must create these boundaries. We must say, okay, my boundaries are, um, when you see my phone there, I appreciate you don't go into it. I mean, that shouldn't be a conversation, but it's insecurity that makes us want to do these things. Okay. Even if, and I'll push it a little further, even if your spouse had done something that caused you to mistrust them, okay? You're not going to rebuild trust by checking phone and checking computer and checking, crossing all of the boundaries of their privacy in terms of the digital thing. You're not going to rebuild the trust that way. I need to know, no, no. You're going to rebuild the trust by first letting your spouse recognize that I trust you. I can't make you a trustworthy person. That's for you to become. I'm going to put boundaries to protect me from um, from you doing the same thing again. So let's say, for example, you give access to your spouse to the bank account, give your spouse a card, and you tell your spouse, don't spend anything beyond um, $500 without checking with me because I have to make sure that other bills are paid. Okay. And your spouse does it one time and a bill end up late because you couldn't pay it, okay? All right. So then you say to your spouse, you see, this is what I was talking about. So here's the thing. Uh, if this happens again, I would have to not allow you to have access to the account. You'll have to come to me in order to know how much money you can have. Okay. So you are setting a boundary here because you already seen the consequence of this boundary being crossed. And now your spouse knows that they don't want to cross $500 because there's a boundary set, and the consequences I will lose access to the account. And I don't want to be having to always have to call and say, can I spend this? Can I spend that? I will stay within the limit. Okay. So the mistrust of violating the financial thing, you still put the boundaries, but you're responsible, and you leave your spouse to be responsible for what the boundaries and the crossing of the boundary, the consequence. Okay. And that's just an example of what I'm trying to say is we don't have to be in people's um, all of their spaces in order to build trust. Trust is something that we give because we're trustworthy people. We don't demand it and we can't build it in other people. But those boundaries, you don't have to, let your spouse give you the password. Don't say, I don't have, you have my phone password, but I don't have your phone password. That's an insecurity conversation. That's not a trust conversation. A trust conversation is you can access whatever whenever you want. I'm fine. I'm not asking you. I'll let you decide that. But this is who I am. This is the boundary. This is how I operate. Okay. I know this is a touchy one. A lot of couples fight over this, but this is the trust has to come from you. You don't get it. You don't demand it from your spouse. Okay. I just touched on the financial boundaries, how we spend it. When we spend it, we sit and we set a budget. We say, this is it. We don't cross this. We don't buy that without checking each other. You know, you can spend so much on yourself, but if you're going to go here, set these boundaries very clearly as to what we're going to do if they're violated, if they're crossed. Okay. But these are places we need to sit down and talk about what, especially when you have one spouse working, when you have two spouses working, I have this conversation with couples. If you have two separate accounts as couples, just a digression here, you need to ask yourself, why do we need two separate accounts? And I could get a lot of reasons for that, but set your financial boundaries again, and it's a trust issue. Let's be clear on what we do, what we don't, what we allow, what we don't allow. Okay. Um, Communication boundaries. We already touched on this when it's about talking. when we talk, how we talk, when we communicate, we have clear boundaries. You don't raise your voice at me. If you raise your voice, I will leave the conversation. If you call me a name, I will leave the conversation. If you disrespect me, you know, um, I'm going to leave the conversation. And then when it happens, don't say, I told you already, don't disrespect me. I told you already, don't raise your voice. That's not what you say. Person raise your voice, you said, you know what? And this conversation is over. Okay, we'll talk about this later. Well, why? So you are setting the boundaries. Next time you're going to have a conversation, you're going to realize we're not going to raise the voices. So when you set the boundary, apply the consequence. Conversation. When is the time to talk? Okay, you want to have these conversations, not in public. There's something to be talked about. Don't bring it up in front of your family and make your spouse feel, you know, uncomfortable, especially when you're your family and it's your and your you know, and your spouse is there and somebody says something and now you're saying it to your spouse and your spouse is feeling uncomfortable because they're surrounded by your family and everybody think it's funny or everybody think it's, you know, don't do that. If we need to talk about something, let's set a time, say, here's the boundary. When we have a disagreement, we never talk about it in front of family, in front of the kids, in front of our friends. When we get home and get in a space, we talk about it. So there's a disagreement, and one spouse start talking, the other one says, I'm not having this conversation. Because that's what we agreed on. That's the boundary. Okay? But when we get home, okay, let's talk about this. So set the boundaries, aid with the communication, when it's the right time, how we do it, where we do it. So it will always be a healthy way to talk to each other. Okay. All right. So just so that you know, there are laws of boundaries according to Henry Cloud and John Townsend. The law of sowing and reaping. Actions have consequences. If you raise your voice, I'm going to end the conversation. If you overspend, you're not going to have access to the credit card. If you ask me to do this sexually, which I told you that is very uncomfortable or I don't like doing, then, we're not going to have sex. It's going to end the sexual time together. Okay? Um, Actions have consequences. So we need to know when we set a boundary, this is the consequence. Okay? That's the law of sowing and reaping. The law of responsibility. Each person is responsible for their own actions. I've emphasized that already. It's not about anybody else but you. You are responsible for you. Then there's the law of disclosure. Boundaries must be clearly explained and understood by both parties. Make sure your spouse understand what you're asking for and that they say yes. So do you understand what I'm asking for? Do you understand what I'm saying, hon? Yes. Okay. I love you. Thank you for understanding. Right? Respect. Again, we have to respect each other's boundaries. It is crucial for intimacy. If you keep ignoring what I told you I don't like you to do, it's not going to build intimacy. It's only going to create distance emotionally and harder for us to be sexually involved, to be close, because you showing you don't respect what I've said to you that matters to me. And it will build the emotional wall, and soon you don't feel comfortable being around the person. Okay? So your boundaries must be focused on what you will do, not what the other person should do. Okay? Just be clear. It's what you will do in response to when the boundaries are crossed, not what you expect the other person to do. I told you to not raise your voice at me. You can't stop them raising the voice, but you said when you raise your voice, the conversation is over. So when the voice is raised, is what can I do? What's the consequence? The action I take. Okay? So it makes it enforceable. In enforceable, we can actually say, yes, it's on you to enforce the boundaries that you set with you and your spouse. All right. This is just saying the consequence must be to suit the boundary you're asking. Okay. If you raise your voice at me, I'm going to move out. That's just ridiculous. Okay. If you raise your voice at me, we're going to end the conversation. Okay. So the consequence must match the situation. There's no reason for you to move out because a voice is being raised at you. Okay. How to set the boundaries, identify the specific issues that you want to talk about, sexually, time-wise, whatever. And then make sure that you explain to the person why I need this boundary, and this is the consequence when this boundary is violated. Okay? Be open and use I and me statement, not you. You know, I I am bothered by this. It is me who is affected by this. I know this is my issue. I know, so this is why I'm asking, not you. Once you start saying you, your partner is going to get very defensive. And be prepared to establish the consequence of the boundaries. Again, that's fair and that's working for you. And then, what if your spouse is not emotionally intelligent or not is resistant? That remember, we can't fix them, but establish very clearly what your boundaries are. Establish very clearly what the consequences would be, and get some support. Get somebody to help you to through the process of dealing with a spouse who's not responding to you. A counselor, someone who could help you manage you, not your spouse. Help you manage you in a space where your spouse doesn't show any regard for your boundaries. How do you manage through that? Now you're in the storm. Now you're in the storm, but you're also very confident that the God who called you is able to keep you, and you have to get the people to help you in order for that to happen to you. So as you go through the end here, here's what I want you to think about. Identify an area in your marriage where you need to set a boundary with your spouse. So be very clear. What is the boundary? Why you need the boundary? Okay. Uh, how you want the boundary to be applied, and what's the consequence? Okay. Just to be very clear. So when you're clear, have the conversation with your spouse. So make sure you're clear first before you have the conversation. And then respect and support each other's boundaries. Okay? So this is a simple one, but the more difficult part is you need to be very clear on the boundary. What is the boundary? Why are you setting it? How you want it to be applied? What's the consequence? Take up one. I'm sure you probably identified many in the marriage already. Just identified one and have the conversation. And remember, it is not you to get your spouse to change, it's you telling your spouse what you want and how you're going to respond when you get it or when you don't get it. That's all you're doing. Okay? It needs to be respectful in terms of your spouse. The consequence need to match the boundary. Don't exaggerate. Okay? So as I pray for you right now, I just want you to think of one area that you have been really struggling with to communicate to your spouse. Uh, you recognize that I need a boundary here because it doesn't feel good. It builds up the resentment, and I want to fix this. So I want you to think of that one boundary, that one, just one, that you need to approach so with your spouse so that you can find the freedom to like being around your spouse or love doing this with your spouse because they know what the boundaries are and they respect it. Father, we want to thank you this morning that you just did not create the institution of marriage before the fall and left us to figure it out after the fall. But God, you have given us the power of your Holy Spirit, who is able to help us as we think of the Acts 27 in the midst of the storm, when they're throwing out things from off the ship and the ship is falling apart. There's a confident, calm Paul says, the God whom I serve has said to me, not one will perish. And so this morning, tonight, Lord, I bring every couple that's represented on this platform, married, engaged, whether it's represented by a separated couple with one person being here or both being here, they're separated, however they are on this platform today, Lord. Father, you know the things that they need to attend to in this marriage that would make it reflect the marriage as you designed it to be. So I pray for that one boundary that has probably has been violated all the years of the marriage, but the one spouse have never really clearly identified the boundary and said it to the spouse and held them accountable by applying the consequence. I pray you give them clarity to do that, strength to do it, not be afraid to speak up and say, this is what I would like from here on. This is what I would do when this happens. This is how I respond when you do this. And let them know very clearly what to expect. So I pray today that you would give wisdom, you would give the right support and the right words in order to speak with this. I thank you for everyone who made the effort to be on this call tonight, Lord. You know they're here because they just need to hear more helpful ways in how to build marriages that's going to honor you. And I pray you bless them. And whatever the storm may be today, whatever they're going through right now, Lord, I pray for clarity. I pray that they will turn to you and focus in you and trust you and know that there's nothing impossible with God. But also remember, like they've experienced in this platform, God works through people, and they have to lean into those who are around them, who sees marriage in the way that you designed it to be encouragement and prayer and mentor and help to them. So I thank you for each and every one here today, and I pray you'd bless them as they continue to build their marriage, as they prepare to enter their marriage or to restore their marriage to your honor and to your glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.